How many of you guys buy things and afterwards you're like, oh, I didn't really need to buy that? You don't need it, but you were in a mood. Like you told yourself that Nicolas Cage pillow is something that you need to have. Or maybe you were with friends and you had a little bit too much drink and then you woke up to an email that said you now have fencing lessons at like 7 p.m. tonight. Or you just genuinely were giddy when you like found a blanket that you just loved. And if you're honest, I know that you might be thinking of one thing back home that you had no legitimate reason purchasing, but you bought it anyways because you felt like you needed it. Can I share with you my latest purchase? Yes. I did not need this at all whatsoever, but I saw this on TikTok and I was like, ooh, I have to get this. Boom. Right? It's so fluffy. I was told I can't wear this out in public, so I brought it to church. Right? I get looks at my family like, what were you thinking? And my answer is, oh, I wasn't thinking at all, but it felt like a good idea. We're going to leave that right there. We often are moved by how we feel. That's okay. God gave us feelings, and we're going to talk about those feelings and how they move us to things. So real life-changing moments happen when feelings take over and compel us to do things. And I'm saying that's okay. Sometimes it takes over and we do things that we would regret. Like we might get angry and do or say something hurtful. We might become deeply fearful of what ifs and miss an amazing and once in a lifetime opportunity. Or you might latch onto something harmful for a moment just to take the pain away, but you find yourself addicted to that thing and you can't let it go. So the negative side of letting your feelings take over. But we've also learned that there are moments where your feelings move you in such a way that it was absolutely the best thing for you and maybe for other people. For example, you put yourself out there to express how you feel about someone, and you find yourself in love for the first time, and you're not alone. Or you're so fed up with a meaningless job and a pursuit of wealth that you change your career for something more meaningful. Or maybe you choose to take a political stance on something. You risk friendships, you risk careers, but you join in the fight for making lives better for other people. Feelings are powerful things. And maybe one of the most powerful feelings, compassion, is what we're going to talk about this morning. Having compassion will make you do things, risky things, but good things. Now, I admit I am not the most emotional person. I used to have a shirt that said no touchy. I give the most awkward hugs because I don't know how they work. I can tell you stories how many times I've tried to give hugs and people have just been like, all right, that's enough. One of my biggest fears is being around people who are going to cry because I don't know what to do in that moment. If there is a feeling I try to have, though, it is compassion, because I believe compassion is so core to being Christian. It's core to who we are at Harbor Covenant Church. And in fact, as we finish up this series called Restart, we are revisiting the things that make us us. We're resetting our hearts to things that we do and that we pass on. We get to take a look at our third and final organizing principle, living lives of compassion, mercy, and justice. And we'll take a look at these things, but I want to start with compassion, because I feel like we would not do the other two things. We would not be merciful or seek justice if we didn't have compassion. It's all tied up together. It's this feeling that makes us act. That's the definition of compassion, being so moved by someone's situation that you can't help but do something about it. In fact, if we look at some of the stuff that Jesus did and said, I asked myself, why in the world would you put yourself through what you did when you could have stayed up in heaven, avoided pain, avoided betrayal, avoided death? And I'm reminded time and time again, it was because God has compassion for his people that he stuck it out in this broken world. Luke 4:14 through 21, there's this cool story. There's a moment right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. He's been gaining a following, and he finds himself back in his hometown in Nazareth. And on the Sabbath day, he's in the synagogue, and he stood up to read from the scriptures, which was custom. And he read from Isaiah, and he unrolled the scroll, and he found the place where this was written. Verse 18. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened to him, and he began by saying to them, "Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." So why did the creator of the universe, the one who made the sun and the moon and the stars and everything in it, put on people clothes and pay attention to the poor and the prisoners and the blind and the oppressed? Does any answer make sense better than compassion? Jesus moved into earth, into the slums of the celestial realms, because he felt so deeply for people to have their dignity and their health and their freedom realized. Later on in Luke, there's another story where Luke describes Jesus feeling so compelled that he engaged in someone's suffering. This is Luke 7, verses 11 through 17. Soon afterwards, Jesus went down to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went with him. And he approached the gate in the town, and the man who had died was being carried out. He was his mother's only son, and she was a widow. And with her was a large crowd from the town. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion for her. And he said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came forward and touched the bear, and the bear stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, rise." The dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized all of them, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us, and God has looked favorably on his people." The word about him spread throughout Judea and all the surrounding country. I love the imagery in this story. There's like a crowd of death, a funeral procession. There's a crowd of life, people following Jesus. There's this moment where there's pain and suffering and sorrow. The mother is in a situation that she is alone in. Her husband's already passed away. Her only son has now passed away. And in that moment, it says Jesus has compassion. And he reaches out and he engages in the situation. And because he's Jesus, he has the power to raise this man from the dead and give his son back to his mother. And both crowds leave as crowds of life. And I love that imagery because it's the compassion of Jesus on this boy and this mother that he has restored people. And the Bible is filled of stories of how Jesus' compassion changes people's lives, most importantly on the cross. John 3:16 through 17. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. And this is big. It's the compassion of God that God is moved to do something about our sinful, painful, hopeless situations. And for those of us that have experienced God's compassion, I think it compels us to do the same for others. And that's something so core to who we are at Harbor Covenant Church that we revisit it every fall. We believe that compassionate people can rechart the trajectory of people's lives for the better. And I've shared this story before, but forgive me if you've heard it, but it is a life-changing moment for me when someone showed compassion on me. I was in a Bible study with some friends in college, and we would meet once a week in a lobby in our dorm room. And I had the most difficult time with the leader of that group. I felt like he was just annoyed with me for one reason or the other. And he would ask a question in the group, and I would share my ideas, and he would dismiss them pretty readily. And if you know me, I am an idea guy. I like to connect dots that I see. They might not be there. My brain can kind of wander. It's what I do. But I also feel I'm pretty creative and pretty smart, and I like to try to connect things. But for whatever reason, this leader was not up for it. He chewed me out in front of everyone for answering a question in a way that didn't really answer the question that he asked. And the question he asked made me think of something else, and I began to process that out loud, and he told me that if I can't answer the question, that I should just keep silent. And that wrecked me. To this day, I still sometimes hold back when I have an idea in a staff meeting or in a group because I'm afraid that my thoughts and my feelings are going to be just labeled as dumb or insignificant or they don't matter. But after this particular Bible study, I was done. I was ready to leave this group, maybe leave church for a bit, stop going everything. But compassionate people recharted my trajectory. That next day, I got back to my room and there was a note on my desk, and it was from one of my friends. It was a simple note, and it said my ideas weren't dumb, and they were thinking the same thing and appreciated me and they didn't want me to stop coming to the Bible study. She said that she herself didn't feel like it was fitting. She was fitting in the group either, but if I stayed, that she would stay with me and stand up for me next time. And I can't tell you where I would be without a note like that, without someone noticing defeat in me, but being compelled to do something about it. Compassion is this: noticing the situation around you, and often it's a difficult situation, and engaging in the situation yourself. Do you have someone in your life that has modeled compassion to you? Are you willing to feel compassion for others? Are you willing to do risky things because of it? One of the risky things that compassion calls us to do is to be merciful. Mercy is the next word in our final organizing principle, living lives of compassion, mercy, and justice. And mercy is this: I think it's letting go of the opportunity to condemn someone. It's forgiving someone of the wrong that they have done. It's like taking an etch-a-sketch to someone's shortcomings and failures and harmful actions and shaking them away and saying that stuff does not define you anymore, and I don't hold you guilty. Mercy is another thing at the core of Harbor Covenant, and this might be the hardest one. Yes, we are merciful because we have compassion. Consider this story from John 8. It says, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts. This is a familiar story, but it works. Where all people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started writing on the ground with his finger. And when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left. With the woman still standing there, Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Mercy is valuing restoration over condemnation. This is another story of someone whose story could have ended in death, but Jesus fights for her life. And I hope you see the pattern developing. Again, John 3:17, "For God did not send his son in the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him." If Jesus didn't come to condemn the world, then I don't think we should either. And you will find people at Harbor Covenant working hard to bring restoration to people's lives. Harbor Cove people have forgiven everything from emotional betrayal to actual criminal records. We don't all the time, we aren't perfect, but the ones that have experienced God's mercy in our own lives seek to extend that to others, even when it's the most difficult. And it is difficult because it's easier to hide behind law and order. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You have to follow the rules. This keeps us safe if you don't lock them up. Except mercy doesn't hide behind law and order. The Pharisees had every right to stone this woman, even though their intentions were twisted. And that's the thing. They were hiding behind something because that gave them power. But mercy is dangerous to power-hungry people. Mercy stands besides criminals, and maybe even stands besides people that hurt you the most. Listen to what Jesus says in Matthew 5. "You have heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it is said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you only greet people, and if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? What would it look like if you forgave the person that hurt you the most? What would it look like if we as a church showed mercy to people in our community that no one else wants anything to do with? What would it look like to be merciful to them? And I know I'm asking you to consider something outrageous. I'm not asking you to ignore any pain that may have been caused or just forget it and move on like nothing has happened. But I'm wondering if we can be moved by compassion even for our enemies to seek to restore them as well instead of condemning them. And if Jesus did that for us, shouldn't we consider doing that for others? Like I said, it's one of the riskiest things a compassionate heart can compel us to do because it forces us to work beyond our own fear and our own pain. And if that is something that you think you need to do, please consider talking to one of the pastors, talking to the leadership team members. There are many people in this church that would love to help you walk through that process. And so finally, let's talk about justice. A compassionate heart seeks to bring justice to communities and broken systems. It seeks to restore human dignity to individuals that have had it stripped away. It seeks to address the cause of injustice so that people don't get run over it again and again. There's an analogy that says compassion is if you're standing by a river and you see people floating down the river in trouble, compassion is helping them get out. Justice is walking up the river and seeing why they're getting in the first place. I had an opportunity to visit some friends in India. I spent a week with International Justice Mission, and I vividly remember a seminar taught by a pretty humble lawyer in Kolkata, and he described seeking justice like this. He says, justice is like a hose. When it's working properly, it keeps things watered and healthy and fresh and clean. But injustice is like a hole in that hose. It makes the flow of justice weaker. And injustice could be a bad law. It could be a racist mindset. It could be corruption in the police or in the government. It could be limited access to resources, poor education, unfair wages, so on and so on. And then he quoted one of my favorite people ever, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German pastor in World War II, who's a pacifist, who stood up to Adolf Hitler. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer said this: it's the job of the church to seek after justice. They can either do a couple things. They can call on the people in power to do what is right, or they can take care of the people that are getting run over by the wheels of injustice, or if truly necessary, they can do what they can to stop the wheels from turning in the first place. And ultimately, that might mean laying down your own life. He looked at the way Jesus handled our sin and our shame and our guilt, and he applied that to a real life situation. And this lawyer in Kolkata that we were meeting with, he went on to say that if we are people who are going to seek after justice, we need to address each one of the holes that we see and patch them up. And if new holes form, to patch those up too. It is a long and difficult process. He was particularly working to see women and girls freed from brothels in the community, and he said it had been the most longest and most difficult fight of his life, but the moments where the hose isn't leaking anymore was the closest thing he's seen to living water that Jesus tells us about. Compassionate people seek after justice, because what good is a faith in someone who proclaims freedom for the captives if we don't seek to see freedom in our world? In fact, the prophet Isaiah has some pretty harsh words for a church or a faith community that doesn't seek justice. It says, the multitude of your sacrifices, what are they to me, says the Lord? I have more than enough burnt offerings of rams and of fat and the fat of fattened animals. I have no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. When you come and appear before me, who has asked this of you, this trampling of my courts? Stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. New moons, Sabbaths, and convocations, I cannot bear your worthless assemblies. Your new moon feasts and your appointed festivals I hate with all of my being. They've become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands in prayer, I hide my eyes from you. When you offer many prayers, I'm not listening. Your hands are full of blood. Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Defend the oppressed. Take up the cause of the orphan. Plead the case of the widow. I believe Christians cannot be people who don't engage in justice. And oftentimes that happens in the political sphere. We can't sit by while there are holes poked in a hose and the threat of more around the corner. And to say that we are compassionate to our core and merciful to our core, that means we also are seeking justice at our core. And let's be honest here, to seek after justice, you might have to engage in the politics and the politicians in our community and in our country. That's where sometimes the rubber meets the road. I preached a similar sermon back to this in 2018, and I said it then and I'll say it now because November's coming around, is when you go to vote with compassion and mercy and justice in mind when it comes to the politicians or the policies that you're voting for. And I know that's a risk to stand in the line of fire sometimes. It's something we've learned early on. Standing up for what is right is risky. Just this week, my 10-year-old daughter stood up for one of her friends against another one of her friends, and that put her in line of also getting bullied. But she did it. She did what was right. She stood up for her friend, and she'd do it again. But we learned from an early age that is sometimes very hard. And so it's easier just to look at difficult things and injustice and say, not today. Or maybe someone else will come along and do that. And I gotta say, it's one of our biggest growth edges at Harbor Covenant. It's difficult, it's risky, and we need your help. When it comes to seeking justice, if this is something that you would like to help your church family, I lost my notes here. If this is something you would like to help your church family get better at, please come talk to me. Please come talk to Pastor Michael or the leadership team. Figuring out how to be just in our society is hard. We have CMJ Sunday. We do it every fall. It's something that gets us outside of ourselves and forces us to have compassion on the community. But I think we can do so much more. It's more than just cleaning up yards at schools and donating supplies. That's good, but I think there's something else. There's something bigger that God might be calling us to. Living lives of compassion means sitting in the gutter with someone while they're hurting. It means going with someone to their chemo appointments. It means helping pay off crippling bills. It means getting to know a student who is walking through hell, often called middle school. It means sacrificing your schedule and rearranging your priorities and even your friend circles to be a friend to someone who is alone. Living lives of mercy means seeking to restore people, not to condemn them. It means visiting people in prison. It means forgiving your dad. It means refraining from blasting people on social media for the hurt that they caused you. It means being kinder to your children when they drive you crazy. It means offering a job to someone who has come out of a prison system. Living lives of justice means engaging our community politically. It means seeking to provide for quality education in our community, to hold people in elected office accountable to the things that they campaign for. It means being honest with the fact that our nation still has problems and we can do a part to address it. It means that you aren't okay with unequal pay for women or for minorities. It means that you have a responsibility to keep the government in check lest it gets too greedy. It means that you sacrifice your well-being for the well-being of others, and it could mean so many more. This is who we are at our core. If we restart this every fall to deal with the things that matter us the most, we can be reminded of ourselves of what matters. We're not perfect, but we live it out as faithfully as possible. We have a model in Jesus Christ who came to proclaim the good news to the poor, freedom to the prisoners, sight to the blind, set the oppressed free. That was his mission, and I think that's ours as well. And so the question is, will you join us? And so I have 3 questions for you. How have compassionate people impacted your life? Is there someone in your life that needs compassion? Number 2, who do you need to forgive to develop a merciful heart? And number 3, what injustices are you willing to put yourself at risk to fight against? Hi, thanks for watching. The people of Harbor Covenant Church really want you to know the love that God has for you, want to grow with you in faith, and want to serve alongside you, not only to help others do the same, but also to make our families and our communities better. If that sounds like something that you can get on board with, then like, follow, and drop us a comment in the video. Watch some more videos on our channel or come visit us on Sunday. You can find out more about Harbor Covenant Church at harborcov.church.